Hello, everybody. Dr. Lonnie Stewart here from the Healthcare Education Transformation Podcast. Are you a physical therapy student about to start studying for the National Physical Therapy Examination? Or maybe you're a professor, a program director, or clinical instructor who teaches DPT students preparing for the NPTE? Either way, we would recommend checking out our sponsor, NPTE Final Frontier, and the community they've built around preparing for and succeeding on the NPTE. That exam and the preparation that goes along with it can be long, tedious, difficult, and stress inducing, but it doesn't have to be. NPTE Final Frontier has the tactics and resources to help address all of the usual barriers. They even have scholarships to help with NPTE study courses, FSBPT registration fees, and even research opportunities. And if that's not enough, they're even donating to the very first annual HET Podcast Scholarship to be awarded at the end of every year. Go to npteff.com for all of the details and use code HET for 10% off all purchases. Links to both the NPTE Final Frontier and their scholarship options are available in the show notes. And now, let's get ready to learn.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Healthcare Education Transformation Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. F. Scott Feil, and I've got with me today Dr. Tanya Miller. We're going to dive into a topic that I personally love. I haven't really dove into it much in the educational realm. It was more just business and life skills, but emotional intelligence, or EQ, as you may have seen it. Tanya, go ahead and tell us a little bit about your background in education, how it's led you to where you are today.
Sure. Thanks, Scott. Thanks for inviting me. So my background in education, I'm actually a second career educator. I started my career in the home health and hospice industry and spent most of my time in leadership roles over the last 20 some years. Made a career change about 6 years ago and started teaching in a physical therapy program. And currently I'm starting a physical therapy program at Harrisburg University of Science and Technology. So really exciting. And I've been really excited to be able to take what I know from leading people in the healthcare world and running corporations to the role of educating the future physical therapist.
I love that. I love that. And thank you for all you do. And it's not easy starting a program from scratch. So congrats on that. I personally didn't realize that I had a fairly high emotional intelligence or EQ type score. And I'm not tooting my own horn here. I'm an extrovert. I'm a people person. Involved in all the groups and stuff. And I get a pretty good sense of what's going on around me and people's feelings and emotions and what the vibe is of the room and things that are just kind of going on around us. But it took me really reading a lot of the Daniel Goleman books and stuff about emotional intelligence to see what that really was. I didn't understand what it was really at first. Could you give us a little bit of a definition as far as what emotional intelligence is?
Well, first of all, you make a really great point. A lot of people think that you just are emotionally intelligent. And one of the things that I start with from always teaching emotional intelligence is that it's a learned behavior. So that's really important to know because if you haven't thought about it or if you haven't engaged with understanding your emotional intelligence, you can always grow and learn in that behavior. So emotional intelligence is really the awareness of emotions and the ability to regulate emotions for yourself and for others. And then also that resilience or grit to keep moving towards that goal, no matter what that emotional state is.
Yeah, I love that. That's very well put, very succinct. So here's where I think, and I'm excited to dive into this, but I think you said it's a learned behavior, right? And it's something that we can learn and grow. I found it very hard early on, even before I knew the definition, to teach that stuff. I found it hard to explain what it was. It was, again, just something that I was naturally good at and got better at as I progressed in life. So for me, it seemed like it was something that was kind of hard to teach. How do you generally go about teaching somebody how to improve at emotional intelligence or grow in emotional intelligence?
Well, there's some really easy skills to work on in emotional intelligence. And sometimes it's things we just don't take the time to think about. I start with always working at yourself. You can't really look at emotional intelligence and your ability to engage with others until you really understand it from your own perspective. So I always start people there. And you start with just your self-awareness. Do you know what your own emotions are? And the usual response I get from people, well, of course I know what my own emotions are. Who doesn't know what their own emotions are? My back to that is, have you ever regretted sending an email? Or have you ever bought something online that 2 minutes later you're like, why did I do that? Or did you ever do something because you were so excited and you just went and did it? Those were the times that you weren't aware of your emotions and the impact of those emotions on your actions. So just starting with pausing throughout the day and saying, what are my emotions right now? How are they influencing what I'm doing? That's the first thing you do when you start learning about emotional intelligence. It's literally having awareness that our emotions really impact our actions. And that's okay most of the time. But we need to understand when we need to do something a little differently. So that's
Yeah,
kind of how I get people started.
I love that. And I think, realistically, there was, a point in my life where, again, I'm from New York. We're kind of big, bold, loud, boisterous a lot of times. And I was very knee jerk reaction early in my life. And it took, again, that self awareness to kind of realize that I was that way and that that was something that wasn't going to get me very far in life. And so I've really, really been working on it, especially the last few years as I've transitioned careers and not having those knee jerk reactions and taking that extra pause and that moment to think about, okay, let's construct a response to this that's going to be, positive and beneficial for everybody involved, right? Instead of just flying off the hinges. One of the things that I'd be interested in hearing your take on is just a lot of times I feel like we talk about soft skills and physical therapy and in healthcare, right? And it seems like there's a pretty good connection between emotional intelligence and those soft skills. Can you kind of talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Well, emotional intelligence is incredibly important in what we do as a profession. First of all, I said about understanding your own emotions, and then you need to be able to regulate your own emotions. So that is okay, I'm upset now. What do I do next? Do I send that email? Do I walk into that room with that patient? Or do I need to go take a deep walk and regroup before I go back into the room with that patient? Knowing how to make the next step is really important in that patient interaction and managing your own emotions. And then it gets to the really great stuff. The really great soft skills is looking at other people's emotions and understanding their emotions and how do we engage with them to help them get to where they need to be. And that's at higher level emotional intelligence. And that can be so powerful. If you are really good tapping into someone else's emotions through things like active listening skills, which takes a ton of practice. It's one of the things that I've worked really hard in my life. I like to move fast. I like to have ideas in my head. Boy, is it hard to actively listen and really hear what someone else is saying. So those are all those skills that we need to bring to the patient encounter to really have an impact on other people's lives. And that's all emotional intelligence.
Being from New York, having ADHD, having an entrepreneurial mind, I'm the same way. My mind is constantly go, 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 idea, 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 and I'm just always thinking and moving. And I think luckily the podcast has really done a good job of slowing me down and just getting me to shut up and be that active listener because, I don't know that I would have done it otherwise. So that's been a fun transition and journey for me. Talk to me a little bit about what you're seeing in the world of academia and just, students that are coming up and kind of navigating emotional intelligence, especially post COVID.
Yeah, and I think that this is one of the areas that as educators, we need to be really tuned into because we have lost some of the ability to grow that. You said, you're now naturally emotionally intelligent. You have the opportunity, you're an extrovert. You have the opportunity to engage with a lot of people. So COVID took a lot of that away from us, especially our students. And we have other factors at play that we have to be aware of: social media, texting, how we communicate. We have lessened the amount of what face-to-face interaction that we have in society to make it more convenient. In doing so, we have students coming up through our educational system that we're going to put out in patient interactions where not only do they have to interact with somebody, they have to be really close and personal with that person. And yet they haven't had near the learning opportunities that maybe I had when I was young. I always joke. I said, when I wanted to see my friends, I had to walk up to the door, knock on their door, and talk to their parents. Scary, and ask if my friend can come out to play. They don't have to do that. So we've lost some of that natural teaching of emotional intelligence. So as educators, we got to help our students get there and help them with those skills and incorporate them as a learning activity.
For me, I think the big thing, the takeaway was like I've seen a couple of studies recently on screen time and how obviously that's on the rise. And a lot of these students that are coming up now are through a generation that's just always had technology and always had screens, and because they're buried their face in the screen all the time and they're not getting a lot of those interactions and things like that, they are missing out on a lot of like subtleties and facial expression and body language and just things that if you have more interactions and more repetitions, you pick up on some of those things, social cues, and I don't want to say practice, but at least experience, and repetition. So I know for us, that's definitely been a struggle with, some of these new generations and cohorts of students that are coming through post COVID. I'm curious, on the other end of the spectrum, then, from a teaching and, a professor point of view, what are you seeing that's been working or what's been in the world of professors teaching stuff toward emotional intelligence?
So I've really spent time, I teach this obviously. And one of the things that I spend a lot of times is having students do self reflection, really writing down about how they're engaging and what does that mean and making a learning plan for emotional intelligence. Just like we make a learning plan to make sure that we get through all of our, land and muscle testing and all of the other assessment skills that we need to have a plan for our students for that. Because again, they didn't have the learning opportunities that maybe we had when they were younger, but we know that that's so important in our profession. So helping them get there and recognizing where they're at. I will tell you, students that I worked with usually don't like the self
Yeah.
reflection activities. They don't want to write about themselves. They don't want to think about themselves. But I've also had people come back to me and say, that was one of the most impactful things that happened in school. And wow, I really needed spending the time. And it's hard, with bigger class sizes and all the content we have to cover, grading reflections, giving that input is tough, but it's necessary and it's valuable.
For me, I think the thing that really made me, look deeper into becoming a great therapist or what pushes you or gets you to a great therapist. I think a lot of times people don't realize the difference between novices and experts is reflection. It's being able to take that time and self-reflect and look back at the day. Hey, what did I do today that worked? What did I do that didn't work? How can I make it better next time? Taking that pause to go back and look and it's not easy to do and it's not fun sometimes to look at yourself and reflect and really pick out the stuff that maybe wasn't so great or things you can improve on, right? Weaknesses or just things that you failed at. And again, I always tell my kids like, hey, fail is okay, right? It's just first attempt in learning. That's kind of what that stands for. Don't worry, it's a learning experience. I cannot tell you the amount of times I have failed things. I mean, from NPTE exam to dissertation process to you name it, I've failed it, I promise. So, it's one of those things where if you can take the time to really pause and self reflect, it's only going to make you a better therapist, a better student, a better learner, and then really just a better human being. I feel like I've grown so much by taking the time to reflect. So I know it's not easy, and I know they don't like to do it a lot, but it's definitely a great assignment to look into, and I do it a lot with it. Our service-based learning stuff and our interprofessional education, because that's a good time to do that self-reflection and see what they got from it and how they could get better at it next time. So I appreciate that for sure. Well, one of the things that you talked about at CSM that was kind of neat, I thought, was how this emotional intelligence kind of works its way into home health. I've done home health, for many years, and I always entered every situation on high alert because you just never know. Home health is an interesting beast, right? You're going into someone's home, a new setting every time. You don't know, dogs, cats, weapons, drugs, who knows? And now for a quick shout out to our newest sponsor, Varela Financial. If you're a physical therapist and you have student loan debt, you got to talk to these guys. What makes them unique is that they view financial planning like running hurdles on a track. And for PTs, the first hurdle many of us run into is student loan debt. Varela Financial will help you get over that hurdle. They not only take the time to explain to you which plans you individually qualify for and how those plans work, but they also take the time to show you what your individual case looks like mapped out within each option. So if you're looking for help on your student loan debt or any area of personal finances, we recommend working with them. I use Varela Financial personally, and they were able to help me lower my student loan repayment from about $1,800 a month down to about $135 per month simply by finding the right repayment plan that best fit me, my family, and our life goals. You can check them out at varelafinancial.com. Link is in the show notes if you need it for reference, and tell them the HET podcast crew sent you. And now back to the show. So tell me a little bit about how emotional intelligence then gets used for patients and how you have success in the patient work.
So you missed dogs, cats, and pet deer. I've had
Yes. Dear.
houses with pet deers. It's always interesting when you see a deer walk down a hallway. You can tell I've done home health in the country. Emotional intelligence from the patient's perspective. Well, I'm going to go back to active listening. And one other skill set that's so important in emotional intelligence that can't be overlooked is empathy. And, we talk a lot about empathy, but really understanding empathy is so important. And that's where that self reflection comes back in. You start with the active listening, asking open ended questions. So, not just going in and asking our patients to get the responses we want. And we know we're all a little guilty of that from time to time because it's faster, it's more efficient. If you give somebody a closed ended question where they can answer yes or no, or give you a score or a measure, then you can check that off and move on. But if you ask somebody, tell me about, discuss with me, describe to me, and really understand where that person's coming from. And again, reflecting back to that person, having that person tell you, you telling back to that person what you just heard them tell you. That builds that empathy. And that's really what you need in all patient encounters. But in this home health, especially, you don't know what you're walking into, and you've got all of their life there with you. And you don't know what part of that life you're going to have to engage with to be able to provide the care that you need to provide. I just really stress when you're talking about emotional intelligence, when it comes to the patient encounter, start with those open ended questions, get comfortable asking them. We're not comfortable asking them. We want short answers. So getting comfortable asking them and then having the patience to listen through it and rephrase what that person told you. It's so powerful and can make such an impact with your patients.
Yeah, because I've definitely been in situations where you're like, all right, do you understand what I just said? Okay, great.
Yep.
And they have no clue. Whereas if you ask, now, can you tell me back what I just told you in your own words so I kind of make sure that you understand what I was talking about? Now it's a completely different story because they have to, go through that process of, all right, you said this, this, and this, and I think it means this, this, and it's two completely different worlds. It's and again, not easy because it's easier to just ask the yes no question and move it along. And I've definitely seen some bad experiences with that where you just ask for a yes no and then they say yes and they nod you to death and you leave and they didn't know what you talked about and they get bad outcomes. So it's super important, I think, to take those extra steps.
I would have my students practice. I'm sorry to add
Yeah,
on
yeah,
that. I have my students practice going through the day and seeing how many times they actually ask open-ended questions to family and
yeah.
friends. And you really, it's an eye-opening experience to do that because you realize how much you don't actually want people to tell you what they're really thinking. You just want your answer and move on. Practicing it with family and friends first really helps.
Yeah, that's a great takeaway. And I think, you'd be surprised, how many people ask a question just to get to the point where they can interject and tell their story. They're not listening. They just, okay, come on, talk to us. Okay, yeah, now it's my turn to talk. It's like, we do that a lot. So I think and it gets down to asking better questions too. That's what really helps us when we're really curious and we really push the envelope. And, you can ask like, hey, well, what is this muscle or whatever? And it's like, oh yeah, that's a muscle. This is what it does. Oh, okay, great. Instead of like, hey, what is the big picture here? What is the function of this? What does this do? And how is it affected by this or whatever? Right now, it starts getting into deeper and deeper levels and we can really zoom out, from a 30,000-foot view and see the patient in a much more holistic approach. So asking better questions, I think, for me in the world of business, I've seen it a ton, but just the world in general, just, if we ask better questions, we'll get a ton better knowledge. We'll get a lot more information that's way more useful than just yes and no.
Absolutely. But that all takes practice.
Yeah. Yeah. It really is practicing with intention,
Mhm.
how to word and verbalize and formalize the questions you're going to ask. Right. And I was an English major before I became a PT. So I was very flowery and, like to really use words a lot and use, a lot of my vocab. And it's tough because you don't want to overdo it, especially with jargon and stuff, right? You still want to keep it understandable. You want to keep it, relatable so that everybody can understand you. But at the same time, you have to make sure that you're getting to the root of what you're really trying to find. Well, I have another question for you. I have a follow up to that. I would be curious. So we talked about students, we talked about professors, we've talked about patients. Now let's just talk about anybody in general here. This is just a, wide open question for if somebody wanted to see where they stood with emotional intelligence and how to start improving on it. What could they do? What are some steps that you would recommend to just, I'm just getting started. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know how well I am at emotional intelligence, but I'm curious and I want to try to get better. What would you give them as far as advice?
Well, there is always formal assessments, and those are wonderful. You can take formal assessments, you can take them online. There's formal assessments you can purchase, but you don't have to start there. You can just do your own investigative work to see where your emotional intelligence is. A great way to do it is a 360 evaluation, which is asking people around you to give you input on how you engage with them. And again, this doesn't have to be formal. You don't have to do it in a written process. Go to those people that you trust to give you good advice and give you good input and say, tell me a time when I didn't act emotionally appropriate or I missed cues in an interaction. Tell me when that happened so I can learn from it. How often do I do that? Is that something that you find that I really need to work on? And what areas do I need to work on? Just ask questions to those around you. And that's a great way to kind of get that feedback. Now that can be scary and that can be a little tough. So the other thing is, I hate to keep going back to it, but reflection. Have a conversation with your significant other or with your kids or your parents or if you especially if you know that person that triggers emotions in you, we all know that person in our lives. Sit and go back and say, okay, where was my emotional state with this person? What actions or what words did I use during that time that were triggered by emotions? And were they appropriate? And did I need to change what I so just doing that self-reflection is a great way to start. And just journal and keep a log of it. And you can start to understand what triggers your emotions. When do you not have good control of your emotions? Or when did you miss the room? You walked into a room and you were all excited and you missed the fact that somebody had just gotten into a heated discussion and you didn't even catch that they were not happy with each other. And your happy energy wasn't the most appropriate for that space and time. Like, when did that happen? When did those types of things happen, and how did you miss those cues?
Yeah, sometimes the truth hurts, so it's tough to ask those questions and have those conversations. But again, it's not meant to come from a mean place or a talking down type situation. It's like you're trying to get better, you're trying to improve yourself, and you're a take on the world and what's going on around you and how your interactions are with the world. So I think if you ask coming from a good place and they're honest with you and can give you that feedback and you can take that as constructive feedback and criticism, then like you said, I think it'll only turn out to be for the best. Well, Tanya, I want to thank you so much for coming on and for sharing all your thoughts on everything EQ and emotional intelligence. What would you say is your big takeaway that you want the audience to know about emotional intelligence? What's your big home run pitch here?
So, the thing I always remind people about emotional intelligence is that it's a lifelong learning activity. It is a learned experience. Don't brush it off and say, "Oh, it's just how I am, and I don't need to get any better at that," or "This people just have to take me the way I am." You can always learn and grow and be better at it. Even on a day you don't feel like it, then tomorrow work on it. But always know that it's something you can keep learning and growing in. And every time you do, it makes it better for you and your understanding of the world and helps you as a person.
Yeah, I love that. Lifelong learning is not just about taking classes or books or CEUs. It's about self development and self improvement.
Mhm.
And again, a lot of that stuff with emotional intelligence and doing the right things, asking the right questions, getting the feedback, making changes. It ends up eventually becoming really leadership skills too. I've seen
Mhm.
a lot of really great leaders that have worked on emotional intelligence and become so much better because of it. So again, like you said, it's a process. It's a lifelong process, and it's a great learned skill, for all walks of life. So I definitely recommend people get out there and do their due diligence when it comes to EQ and emotional intelligence. We ask all of our guests this one final question. And this question is, if you could change one aspect of higher education, whether it be DPT or otherwise, what aspect would you change and how would you change it?
I think one of the things that I would change, and I don't have the answer to this, I would change the pressure that we have on getting the grades, accomplishing the goals, and change it to the true meaning of learning and being there for wanting to have that information and engaging in that information. And I do not have the answer to that, but that would be definitely something I would change.
Well, that's why the podcast started, right? I didn't know. I just get the experts on to tell us their opinions, you know? So I think a lot of what you're talking about there is we're seeing this nowadays in physical therapy programs in particular, where, there's starting to be more of a shift toward competency based learning, right? And I think that's a smart move because, we're looking for mastery of skills here and we're looking for like, are you safe? Are you competent? Okay, good. Let's move on to the next skill and build on it and build on it, right? And grades are just so worthless to me. Like I tell my students all the time, I really don't care much about the grade. Did you take away something from my class? Did you learn something at least? Was I able to transfer knowledge that you're going to be able to use for your, many, many years to come? Right. And I think if we focus, and again, grades are kind of new in the world of academia and education, right? They're probably only about 100 years old or so. But when they introduced them, it was like, oh, this is a way to quantify things. And it's like, okay. And then even then there was some, jumbling stuff around. And then, it seemed like arbitrary. And to this day, to me, it still seems like arbitrary. Yeah, I understand it's a way to quantify, testing and exam scores, but it just doesn't seem like it's doing us justice because it's like I'm getting more and more and more of what's on the test. What's on the test? What do I need to know? What do you tell me what I need to know so that I can get this score? I got to get this score. I got to pass this, and I got to get this score above, or else I'm not going to pass. And it's like, well, okay, you're kind of playing the numbers game here. Are you learning anything? Are you taking anything away from this? Can you demonstrate for me that you do know what we went over? So it's a tough one. I don't know that we know the answer. I think competency based learning is a good step in the right direction, and I hope that we see more and more of that. Seems to be doing some pretty good things in the world of healthcare education, so that's good. But yeah, I don't know. Yet to be determined, I guess. Well, again, Tanya, thank you so much for your time and for coming on to chat with us today. Where can people reach out to you or find you if they want to follow up and learn more about emotional intelligence or just see what you're up to these days?
Sure. You can reach me at tmiller2 at harrisburgu.edu. That's the best email address to reach out to me, and always happy to talk about emotional intelligence. So thank you so much for having me on.
Awesome. We'll put that in the show notes so everybody can reach you very easily. Tanya, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it.
Sure. Thank you.
Well, I hope that episode was entertaining as much as it was informational and educational. If you enjoyed this episode or any of our past episodes, we ask you to please subscribe to the podcast and leave us a rating and review. And please share out the episodes to those who you feel may be able to benefit from them. We also urge you to follow us on all social media platforms at HET Podcast and let us know what topics or experts you would like to hear from in future episodes. And just as a reminder, none of the information on today's show should be considered medical advice. It's simply infotainment or edutainment to help educate our audience. For medical advice, we always advise you to reach out to your preferred medical professionals, and we'll see you on the next show.